I'm with Erev Shabbos, recording now the shir for Parshas Koirach, Panorama of Halacha, number 36. Wasn't able to do it yesterday on the airplane, and so I'm recording it before Shabbos. And since today is the Siyum of Rambam, Sefer HaFloah, so I'm going to start off with the Siyum of Sefer HaFloah. See how we have that on the screen, the last halacha. Whilst I was traveling, I met someone who made a very interesting observation how how the Rambam in some Sforim it's rather Hilchos Nezikin, Sefer Nezikin, Sefer Noshim, which are but in Hilchos Sefer Hafloah is a Hilchos Shavuos, the name of Shavuos I would say the Nezikin, Hilchos Nedorim and Naziris on Seder Mishnah is Seder Noshim, Hilchos Erchim v'Charomin is in Seder Kodshim, and the Rambam brought those four elements together and gave them a new name, Sefer HaFloah, which means a sefer of matters created through expression, for want of a better term. Okay, so that's the Sefer HaFloah, and we're going to read inside. A person shouldn't dedicate to hektish his entire estate. Is actually in violation of what the Torah expects us to do. A person will consecrate from that which he owns, not everything. As Chacham explained this, to give away everything is not considered piety, or is considered foolish behavior, because it's losing all his possessions. And the concern is that he's going to, as a result, become needy and now start asking others for help when he had the resources to support himself, and he threw them away, gave them away. Indeed, that is not a cause for mercy, for compassion. He shouldn't have done this. The pious is pious, but is in a silly way, in a stupid way. So then is considered those who confuse and mixing up the world. It looks like it's piety, but actually it's causing damage to society in a way by becoming now more needy. When one does squander money for mitzvahs, shouldn't squander more than a fifth, 20%. In the Nevi'im, sorry, one should follow the advice of the Chachamim, that matters should be taken in balance, whether it's Torah matters, whether it's mundane matters, even when it comes to korbanos, or sacrifices which a person is obliged to offer, even there the Torah uses language of being considerate, of being balanced with your budget. Should bring according to what he could afford. If that's even where you are obliged to, Torah says check your budget. How much more so when it's something beyond your budget, beyond your duty? Sorry. So how much more so there that and we should only make a vow and a promise and commitment if something which is within your reach. It says, a person should give according to his means, according to the blessing which Hashem has bestowed upon him. Just one little comment to add to this. You have a couple of comments perhaps. We have in Mamorim about the word misas yodoi, and talks about this on various pirushim. One reference I have was recently published in the Dvar Malchus. That's the Maimer for Sisa Chag Shavuos Tov Shin Lamed Aleph. So we just learnt it a couple of weeks ago. In Oisvov, he talks about this based upon Oir HaTorah. The Misas Yodoi is an unusual term, and there are various Pirushim in this. One other thing which I'd like to say is there was a person who used to give away enormous amount of money, and he himself, he earned well, but he lived quite frugally. And they asked him, what does it mean? It says that you shouldn't be squandering more than 20%. He says squandering means, well, obviously this is taken in a way of, in his way, squandering means spending on yourself. So everything else, means if what he's spending on himself, he saw that as squandering. Everything else, the other 80% he gives away. So that was that. The other point is obviously that the Alter Rebbe in Igeres Tshuva talks about giving excessive amounts of tzedakah, and he says that this limit of Alifazer Yosem Chomesh is under normal circumstances, but if a person feels a need to give tzedakah in exchange for having to fast for atoning for sins in his past, then that's no worse than medicine, where a person's allowed to spend a lot of medicine. So the same thing, if he needs medicine for his neshama, so he's allowed to give more than Chaimish. We'll go on to, since it's very besmichas, very close to Gimel Tammuz. So whilst I was traveling now, someone pointed out to me something which I missed out in the Siddur. And so in the Siddur, which I put in my own research, but also made a point wherever there's a comment of the Rabbeim on the Siddur, that should be included. And this escaped my attention. So this is a comment of the Rebbe printed in the back of what's called the Rishimas HaMenorah. So after Gimel Tammuz, it was found in the Rebbe's drawers, whatever, stacks of handwritten notes, which he'd written many, many years back. And one of those was a long treatise about the menorah. There's a whole discussion, which way it was positioned, and etc. Fascinating stuff. That came out, was published in 20 weekly booklets. And eventually now it's a separate sefer. But at the very end, there is this following note. Ha'ora af she'ena shaykh le'inyan hanal. A comment not totally connected to the menorah, per se, to the discussion of the menorah. Ba'abai have a masader. In the passage we say every day in the morning, before Ezeu Mekoimon, we have a passage which starts off with Abaya would present the series of events, which are the procedure in the Beis Hamikdash, goes to the Seder Marocho. And so, Pri Eitz Chaim, in Shar Elam HaAsiyah, says the following. But when you come to Ktoiris Kedemes Leivarim, from that point onwards, Ein loy mamilas koidemes mishom ve'elach. The word koidem or koidemes, which is this one before this one before this, from this point onwards, the word koidem should not be included. And rather, it should be evorim lemincha, vechein kulon. And so to all the rest, ad uvozichin koidmin l'somet shel bein ha'arbaim, with the exception of the very last, and that is that Bozichin come before Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbaim. So this is, I'm going to bring it on the screen for those who are following or with visual. So you can see here that all the various stages, the word Koidem or Koidemes comes in, whereas from Evorim Lemincha, the word Koidem is omitted until the very last one. And it says, Bozichin Koidem L'Somet Shel Bein Ha'arbaim. And so this is a statement in the Pri Eitz Chaim, but it doesn't give any explanation why the word koidim does come up earlier and is omitted later and then is restored at the very last stanza. So v'hodolei omar v'chol ha'memra koidim. Why does he not mention the word koidim all the way through? And the answer is the otik hiruchla. Is a buyer like a peddler. A peddler can stand again and say the same thing: apples for sale, nice apples for sale, etc. Can stand and keep on saying the same thing again, even though it's repetitious. And but that's not the style of Chachamim. So he doesn't need to say it all the way through. Then Hodam Basoif. Why is Koidemes or Koidmin is restored at the end? Because there's an entire passage time message. Gam hamoka shenemar oleho. So let's go back to the text again. So the last thing is Vazichin, that's the scoops of levoino, of frankincense, which are taken from the shulchan on every Shabbos, and they were representing the lechem eponim. So the lechem eponim is eaten by the kohanim, but the uh, the representation on the mizbeach are those two scoops of frankincense, which are sitting a whole week together with the loaves of bread, and now on Shabbos they are offered on the mizbeach. So those two scoops will be done before the afternoon korban tamid. Why so? As it says in Pasuk, you do the korban oila, etc. Oleho hashlim kol hakapon. The word oleho tells you that's not from the Pasuk, that's from the Limud. That from the word oleho, that the korban tamid is meant to be the last korban of the day. So since we've got here a halacha plus a shenema, a source, etc., therefore the word koidmin is restored there because it's middle of a longer limud. So in style it belongs there. But then the question is then why does it stop in the middle at the given state where it stops? As mentioned before, from Evorim lemincha the word koidmin is dropped. Yes, let me basically fanim and explain two ways. First one way is that the beginning of a buyer's procedure is from Marach Gdola. So the Marach Gdola is the large pyre which is for the korban tamid. The Marach Shniya Shel Ktores is to create a pile of embers which will be scooped up and taken into the heichal to burn the incense. Now, so the larger pyre is for the organs, and that's for the burning of the fats and the organs of the korban tamid. So therefore, mimaroch gdoila till evorim, until that point, meshech shayach hadodi, you've made the pyre, and that is for the purpose of burning these organs. The maroch gdoila nasis b'shvil haktiv lehaevorim. That's the purpose of this pyre in order to use it for offering the organs of the korban tamid. Achel the Rav, it goes into a little bit of a lomdus in Gemara Yom Chav Dalet. Rav says it's relevant for some particular halacha over there that the setting out the wood for the marocha is not called avodah tamo. It's not considered a completed task. Actually, until the organs are placed on the pyre, the avodah of setting out the wood is not complete. So he sees it as a kind of a closed unit, where even Rabbi Yochanan there, who's a bit more lenient in that discussion, it's obvious that the marocha, the pyre of wood, that larger pyre, is for the korban tamid, which is the evorim, which is the organs of the korban tamid. After that comes the mincha, which is the bread offering, which is a separate unit. That's for this reason, since we've got here a sequence from the pyre and Maroch Gdela until the organs are placed upon it, that's one unit, and therefore they are kind of hyphenated by saying kodim, 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 kodemus, etc. That's the first explanation. Or yoimar, or this is another explanation. That in the Gemara, now this is Daf Lamed Dalet in Yoma, talks about learning from Psukim that between the offering of the organs of the korban tamid and the mincha, which is the bread offering, so we learn from a pasuk that there should be no other activity in between. So the word kodim tells me that A is before B. It doesn't say that there mustn't be any pause between A and B. And here, there shouldn't be a pause between Evorim and Mincha. So between Evorim and Mincha, and Sachin and Sofin, Kosav Lehedje Bikra, we learned from a pasuk, Shein Sorch Lias Hefsik B'neim. There should not be a pause between them. It's not just that one is before the other in sequence, but it's also that there should not be any pause in between, as you can see in Gemara Yom Lamed Dalet. Well, the Ram is also to indicate that whereas until now it said the word kodim or kodemus, from this point onwards, shino meha kodim, there's a change of style. Amoron to Kufin. Gambli Efsek Koidmin Bene. The word koidim is omitted to say that from between Himbar and Mincha, it's not just that one should be before Mincha, but actually that there should not be any interval, any pause at all. So that's why the word koidim is dropped. To say it's Himbar and Mincha means it has to be takef, one next to the other. On the posuk. Once he's already missed out the word koidim at this point, so at later stages, the next few stanzas, even though he could have put in the word koidim, but once it's dropped it, he drops it until the very last one, which we said the explanation, and that is because it's got more of a biur, therefore it has it all as a unit. Okay, let's move on. My next question, which I don't have anything on the screen about, is about someone whose father is over 90 and she has the tremendous zchus of caring for him, mitzvah of kibbud av, and so it's a tremendous zchus. Now the doctor has advised he has to drink a significant amount of water daily, and in his frail state, he often dozes off, doesn't drink enough, which would impair his health. So is the daughter allowed to wake the father to have a drink? And we all, as little children, we were told the story of Dolma ben Nesino, that he didn't want to wake up his father even to be able to sell the Parah Aduma. Sorry, was it sorry, not the Parah Aduma. This was the stones for the Choshen. And he refused to wake up his father, even though there was a fortune at stake. So we've been taught this story, but that's true. But here it's not for your fortune; it's for the father's fortune, for the father's uh, health and longevity. And therefore it is okay. It's the right thing to do to wake him up. The question would be, what if it would be upsetting? That's another question. How would you do that if there's a treatment which is upsetting to even though it's for their health, but it's upsetting, that would be more of a challenge. The next point we have is that the same person, the father is frail and he takes a long time benching. It takes him an hour. Seems to be a challenge for him. Is there room to allow him to just say Al Hamichya rather than the full benching? Now, if you remember, some time ago we had last year, year time, we had the story of someone who had eaten bread and then eaten lokshen. I forgot about the bread and said Al Hamichya for the lokshen, for the lokshen, and also he now is asking, does he have to bench separately for the bread? And so, in other words, b'diavad ayuyotze with al hamichya for bread, and it's not such a pasha to halacha, but I think in this instance, there's room to be mekel, that he should be able to just say al hamichya, and just by the way, I think we once discussed this before. On a fast day, on Yom Kippur, sorry, that's on Yom Kippur, we're not allowed to eat. What about a person who really doesn't know what's going on? Are they allowed to be given food on Yom Kippur? That's a very serious problem because, like you're not allowed to give a person who doesn't know what's going on, you're not allowed to give them treif. So to give them food on Yom Kippur. Now, if they need it, then of course you do give it to them. But if they don't need it, just is it permitted to give them food on Yom Kippur? That's a complicated question to give a heter for that. Let's move on to the next question which we have on our list. Now, we discussed this in the past, but it's come up again. Someone asked me just so I was at the Oyhel, someone asked me, he says, we have a situation where we have a minyan, we have 6 people who've davened Shemona Esrei, and one of them is still taking his time. So last time we discussed this was about Ma'ariv, whether you can say Kaddish whilst one of the 6 You got 10 people in the room. Six have davened, but one hasn't finished. You only had six daveners. So could you say Kaddish after Ma'ariv whilst this fellow is still in his quiet Shemon Esrei? Which I said at the time, no. Here it's even more chomer. Here it's talking about the bracha of Chazar Hashatz. Can you start Chazar Hashatz? And let's say you've got Tisha Oinim, but you don't, of this, you only had six people who davened and one of them hasn't finished. So can you do Chazar Hashatz this stage? So at the time then, and this, I'm going back to this again, in Kuf Chov Dalet, the halachas of Chazar Hashatz, the Alter Rebbe writes, Simu Hatzibur Tefiloso. Once the Tzibur has concluded their quiet prayer, then Yachshe Hashat Hatfilah B'Kel Ram. Then the Chazan repeats the tefillah. Whatever the reason given for that, but that's what he says here. You have to have what Chazor Hashat, the procedure of Chazor Hashat. There is a tefillas hatzibur. When that tefillas hatzibur, which means the minimum tzibur is six mispalalim, roiv 10. When the tzibur have finished that tefillah, then you can do Chazor Hashat. You should do Chazor Hashat. But if one of your tzibur, which is one of your six, hasn't finished, then it's too early to do Chazar Hashat. So I know it can be frustrating when one of the six is very slow davener and other people want to get to work. That's so I'm afraid the answer is no. You'd have to have the six daveners, one of them being the Chazan, but you'd have to have the six daveners, only then could you do Chazar Hashat. It's another Shaila from a different part of the world. This is about Kriyas HaTorah on Shabbos. So it's somewhere on one of these small islands where there's a shliach, and he has a situation where this Shabbos he's going to have quite a number, just about a million, but quite a few of them are Kohanim. So he wants to know how this works. So normally for Kriyas HaTorah, we have a Kohen for the first Aliyah, and then if he's lucky, we give a Kohen, and we can give a Kohen the Mavtir. But the other six should not be Kohen. They are Levium or Levi, one Levi, and then there's five Yisraelim. Now, he doesn't have that amount of Yisraelim, so how are we going to work this Aliyah Kriyas HaTorah? So as you can see on the screen, we're reading from Siman Kuf Lamed Hey, a city which is only Kohanim. But it's as if there's a one Yisrael, that Yisrael should read the first. And yeah, he's going to have Rishon, and the rest will be getting to all the other guys. If there's not enough Yisraelim, so then you have one Kohen after the next Kohen, and there's no Pekam, there's no aspersions that he might not be a real Kohen because everyone knows that there's only Kohanim there. And same thing as city, which is all Levium. So now let's read the Mishnah Berurah for a little bit more clarity. It's all Kohen but one Yisrael. What happens if you've got two Yisraelim? So it looks like if there's only one Yisrael, then Yisrael reads first, and the rest are Kohanim. If there's two Yisraelim or more, so then we're going to do a Kohen first, and then we're going to go give Sheni. We'll give, and there's no Levi, so we'll call up the Kohen again, and then Yisraelim. And then once you've finished the Yisraelim, then you can call up Kohanim again. So that's one possibility. Kohen, Yisrael, and then as many Yisraelim as you have, and then you go back to Kohanim. And from after you can do a Kohen also. But he goes there and he says, if there's just two Levium and two Yisraelim, then we'll do a Kohen Levi Yisrael, and then Kohen would be the Shvi. So that's another variation. All right, so to summarize that, he doesn't have enough Yisraelim to go around. So then he'll start off with Kohen, and if there's no Levi, then it's Kohen, then Yisrael, and then continue with Yisraelim until he has no more Yisraelim, and then he'll go back to Kohanim again. We'll go on to the next question. Someone asked about a Jewish woman who's given birth to a baby boy. Their biological father is not Jewish, and he wants to be Sandik. Now, my first reaction is that I'm very grateful that this non-Jewish man is cooperating that the boy should have a bris. And so if he wants to be Sandik, I didn't see, it may not be the most appropriate, but that's the child's biological father. So here we have on the screen from a sefer called Divrei Malkiel. So Divrei Malkiel, he was a Rav in Lomje in the Litter, very respected posek in his time. But actually, what happened here, we have to understand the context. He got a letter from Bucharest. Bucharest wasn't known to be a very strong bastion of Frumkeit. And there was a Moyal who was, he would lechatchila delay Britain to be on days where more comfortable days. And he also would encourage the idea of having a non-Jew a non-Jewish associate to be the Sandik. There was a third thing, which also I don't remember what the third thing was, and so the Divrei Malkiel addresses that, and he says that the Sandik has got a chelik, has got a part in the act of the bris, and just like a non-Jewish doctor, a non-Jew is not allowed to do the actual bris. So for this reason, since the sandik is part of the carrying out the bris, therefore you're not allowed to have a goy as a sandik either. Now, then we see that he's worried that this might actually be a defect in the act of milah, because if a goy was the moyel, so there are more paskins that you have to do hatofas dan bris. And therefore he seems to be intimating that if you have a goy being sandik, it may be calling for hatofas dan bris even. And therefore, it's forbidden for the moil to do the bris when there's a goyish person as sandik. And he's worried about brochel batola because he's not doing the mitzvah appropriately. And he feels that a moil does engage in such a bris, he should be banned from carrying out brisin. So there's very strong language here. But having said that, and as I told you, the story there was bringing a business associate, some kind of a lord, some a person in the Goisha community, to bring that person to be the sandik. And that's where the main objection was. Here, we're talking about the biological father, who has in a way, he's got the keys in his hand whether the business is going to happen or not. So you need to be in his good books. And indeed, we have here a quote from Rav Elyashiv, where you have a non-Jewish father who wants to be sandik for his biological child, and he says, but here's another aspect: if he threatens that if you don't let him be sandik, he will block the act of the bris. So that's a bit more extreme than our situation. So he quotes the Divrei Malkiel, who seems to hold it better they should remain an oral. But the Rav Elyashiv felt that one should be giving him the father an honor out of appreciation, and therefore it's not an avla, it's not wrong to allow him to be sandik. So he says allow him to. There it seems to be the way it's presented is because otherwise he was threatening to pull away from the bris altogether. But it seems to be not such a terrible problem, even though the Divrei Malkiel was so dead against it. As I said, that was more possibly in a kind of a situation, people pandering to non-Jewish associates. They also bring a story with the Tantarov, the Divrei Chaim, a similar story, and there was, if they wouldn't allow the bris to have with the Goyish Sandik, the child would be baptized. And the way it's told, he says, "Taufen nicht," that let them baptize the child rather than give a bris with a Goyish Sandik, which is even more extreme. But as I say, you have contemporary poskim who say that's okay, and if there's a pressure, it's not the ideal, but if there's a pressure, that one can be meichel. The next question I have here, I've really never dealt with this before. So this is as you can see on the screen, it's a dough for gluten-free bread. This dough does not form a dough which you can work with your hands. It seems to be much more soft, and you pour it into cup cases or into tins, and it's this gluten-free flour, water. I don't know what the rest of the recipe is, but it's made for bread because once it's baked, it actually has got a similar profile to bread. So the question is hamoitzi or mezainis? So in Perik base, Birchas Hanenin, the Alter Rebbe talks about three categories which downgrade bread from hamoitzi to become snack food and therefore mezainis. These are the breads which is not normal to have them as a meal, and therefore they are mezainis. Lachmanio is troiknin and pasabob kisnin. Meanwhile, what are lachmanios? Is loaves which are that the mixture of flour and water was a soft mixture, not thick, like a bread dough, which can be kneaded and rolled with your hands, but rather more like a sufrinin, which is a donut kind of dough, more spongy, which is not malleable, can't roll it with your hands. And this was then baked in an oven, in a pan, without liquid, even though it's lechem gomer in relation for hafroshes challah. It's lechem gomer in relation to you can yaitze matzah with this. But since it's in this context of a bracha, since most people will not have this type of bread for a meal, therefore it doesn't warrant hamotzim bechas hamozin. Rather, it remains mezonos and me'en sholish, unless you eat a shia kviyas suda. Shia kviyas suda would be the equivalent of 4 eggs, and that worked out to be, if an egg is, well, if a kazayas is 29 milliliters, so an egg is twice the amount, so therefore 4 eggs is 8 times a kazayas, and therefore that brought me to a cheshbon of about 230 mil. So we're not talking about weight, we're talking about volume. But if it's the equivalent of a little bit less than a quarter of a liter, that's how much you're eating in a session. It doesn't have to be in a short session, but that's how much you're going to have at this meal. Then you could make hamotzi on it. If you're not going to have as much as that, it actually remains mezainis. We're going to move on. So two feedbacks. One is that if you may remember that last week we spoke about this gate, and it is a wide gate of about 4 meters. It's on rollers. It's rolled to one side in order to allow a car to drive in. This larger opening does not have a lintel, but within this rolling door there is a smaller door to the left of the picture where you can enter on foot. Now that smaller entrance does have a lintel on top, and so here's the question: does the smaller entrance require a mezuzah or not? And I shared with you last week from the Sefer Piskei She'orim, where some say that it's not chayav mezuzah because the mezuzah, sorry, this whole door frame is not fixed. It's moved around. And therefore, it doesn't require mezuzah. And others say it does have to have a mezuzah. And then he says, put up mezuzah without the bracha, with a bracha. Okay. So this was our discussion last week. So someone sent me a piece from Tzemach Tzedek. This is from the Sefer Piskei Dinim. So the first part is talking about when you've got a wide doorway and it's got two doors which meet at the middle. And what happens if there's a post at the middle? Where the two doors meet, there's a post. Does that mean each of those two doorways need a separate mezuzah? Or is it all one doorway? And it's, okay, so it's got a post in the middle, but it's all really one doorway. So that's the discussion in the Rashba, which he refers to, and the Taz discusses this. But then the Tzemach Tzedek goes further. V'hine b'shar godel. If you have a large gate, now this in the yeshiva in Benoit, and it's very common in France. I mean, Rue Lamartine had the same thing. You have a large doorway, which has got large doors, which are about 4 meters high. The doors are more than a meter wide, very large doors, like more about 4 or 5 feet wide. Within one of those two large doors, there is a smaller door. And so here's the question, whether that smaller doorway needs a mezuzah. V'hine b'shar godel. Im osu pesach b'ser chadelas hagodel. You have a large door, and inside the large door you included a smaller doorway. Afilu niftach b'fnei atzmo, even though it can be opened independently of the larger door. Yesh lehem ein tzorech mezuzah b'fnei atzmo. There's no need for separate mezuzah. So you've got a doorway which is, let's say, 3 meters wide. Within that, we've got gates, and within one of the gates, there is a smaller doorway which is 1.5 feet wide, etc. So he says the smaller doorway doesn't need to have a separate mezuzah. Because this doorway has already got a mezuzah on the larger doorway, and therefore harei bichal mosai moneh. So the 200 includes 100, which means that if there's a mezuzah on the larger doorway, so the smaller doorway is included. That's what seems to be here is that the fact that the mezuzah, the smaller doorway, is movable, because when you open the large doors, that smaller door becomes has no function. That doesn't seem to faze the Rebbe. He's saying just that the mezuzah on the outer doorway covers for the inner doorway. That's it. And therefore, the movability is not a reason to exempt it. And going back to our story, so the fact that the smaller doorway is movable, that in itself doesn't seem to be a heter, an exemption from mezuzah, and therefore it should have a mezuzah. Right. Our last thing which we have for today, we don't have any more slides, and that is a feedback. Really, it was very gratifying to meet people telling me how they use the shiurim, and one father tells me that he drives his children to school. It's a 12 and 13-year-old children, and they ask the Tati to put on the panorama, and he finds it very valuable input. So all this kind of feedback is encouraging. So here we had a discussion about men going to mikveh on the afternoon of Yom Tov, when it's going into a second day of Yom Tov, or when Yom Tov leads into Shabbos, like we go on a regular Friday afternoon, where they should go on a Friday afternoon, which is during a Yom Tov. And I'd mentioned that I hadn't seen this, but that evidently is not so much of a proof, because there's a Mr. David Waxer, or Rabbi David Waxer, who writes to me that going back a few decades, was a young man, he was encouraged to go on Yom Tov, to mikveh dafka before mincha rather than after mincha. So if you remember last week we had a discussion, to go on one day for the other might be seen as preparing on one day of Yom Tov for the next. which we don't normally do preparation from one day to the next. So he was advised go dafka before mincha, so that it should be for the davening of today rather than just for tonight. He mentioned the name of Moshe Levertov, who had guided him on that, and he says when he went to mikveh, then he wasn't the only one. There was so it seems to be not so unknown people going to mikveh on Yom Tov, preparing for the second day of Yom Tov or for Shabbos, which follows straight on after Yom Tov. With this, I'm going to wish you all a good Shabbos. Probably by the time you listen to this, will be Motzei Shabbos, but either way, it should be a good Shabbos and should be the Gimel Tammuz Farbrengens should be sources of inspiration, motivation to carry out the Rebbe's shlichus, and ultimately that shlichus is the second oil of Malchus Shin Dalad Yud, to prepare the world to greet Moshiach Tzidkenu. May we be zoche v'sechazena inenu v'shuv kol tzim erachamim b'korev mam shkushas. Kodesh.